Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me and continue to support this channel. It takes a lot of time to think about the content, to design the content, to edit the content. Please click on the subscribe button and continue to support content development. Once you do that, you'll encourage me to do more. For someone to be excluded, they have to be oppressed. And I use the word oppression because I'm going to make a connection to Paulo Freire's work. Now, people who experience oppression in a society are individuals who are not treated equally, they're excluded, the opportunities are limited. And as a matter of fact, oppression can be systematic, it can be based on any language used and so forth. But what inclusion does is try to ensure that these oppressive practices are limited. Hence the connection with Paulo Freire's book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Yes, Paulo Freire wrote several decades ago regarding the need to ensure that the oppressed are given the power and the tools to elevate themselves. In our society today, there are so many things taking place that the oppressed continue to be excluded. How can we solve this situation? There are many things. We are moving towards an inclusive society, or maybe greater inclusion, we could say. But nevertheless, there are some individuals that will continue to be oppressed. But I want to take you a bit deeper because I want us to look at what happens when the oppressed becomes the oppressor. Yes, it's possible. Yes, it is possible. We have seen in the society today that many individuals who suggest that they're advocates for inclusion, once they reach on the pedestal that could give them an opportunity to be more vocal, they become silent. The question is why? Not everyone who advocates for everyone at the bottom will continue their role, and we have to understand the context of what happens. Yes, the reality is context is everything, according to my co-worker. Now, I want to go a bit deeper, as I stated before, and I want us to really expand on what Paulo Freire stated. Now, let me read a section from his work.
It is in the interest of the oppressor to weaken the oppressed still further, to isolate them, to create a deepened rift among them. This is done by varied means, from the repressive methods of government bureaucracy to the forms of cultural action with which they manipulate the people by giving them the impression that they are being helped.
So Paulo Freire is stating that really there's a divide and rule process in place by the oppressors. And he goes on to suggest, let me read another section from the book. The oppressors do not favor promoting the community as a whole, but rather selected leaders. The latter course, by preserving a state of alienation, hinders the emergence of consciousness and critical intervention in total reality. And without this critical intervention, it is always difficult to achieve unity of the oppressed as a class. What Paulo Freire is stating that in many situations, leaders are selected. And the leaders are selected not to make change, but to be there to sanction that they are part of the community of change, but actually change is not taking place. I lived in England for nearly 10 years. And during this time, I attended a council meeting. The council members sat on the platform and they were telling us that they were trying to develop inclusive practices within the community. And of course, we asked how many members of the community were from the minority sector. The answer was none. And I'm saying to myself, even if we had 2 or 3, could we have made that impact? Because at times, many individuals will sit on these boards and will not articulate for what true advocacy is. Many times they sit on the board, but because of legislation and because of the current laws that are present, they cannot make the change. Now, many have become bandwagonists because they are put in place because of them advocating over a period of time and people recognizing that they are advocates, in quotation, but once they reach that point, they stop advocating. As Paulo Freire is stating, that many times individuals who are leaders in the society, having come from the oppressive side of it, are now the oppressors. We have to be very cautious of that because today we realize that there's a movement towards ticking the box as it relates to inclusion and diversity. There's a movement for hiring faculty who might deem themselves as a minority or an advocate for inclusion. But I go back to the point that inclusion does not reside on a piece of paper. So therefore, if you get that title and you get that level up there, you should be actually doing work. Yes, work on inclusion, work to make this place a better place, work to ensure that people reflect on their actions daily and make the required change. I like the work of Pablo Freire because he puts a lens. He puts the lens of critical thinking within the framework of inclusion. And the reality is there can be no transformation by just adding individuals to those boards and those communities and so forth without actually having the infusion of change and transformation to fellow board members. It's useless. It's useless to say you have had a minority hire or you have a diversity leader in the field without that transformation taking place in the boardroom. A few years ago, I wrote a book, Developing an Inclusive Organization. And the reality is there can be no inclusion if you're not reflecting on your action. Going back to Pablo Freire's thought, one of the biggest obstacles that I see as it relates to inclusion is that sometimes the oppressed become the oppressor. And as a result, once they're there, they do not value the concept of inclusion and equal opportunities, the concept that everyone has a right to be heard. They don't respect the rights of others. They don't understand that the legal framework that they came into needs to change, and those individuals must change it, are presently there. Then they formulate themselves within the context of that organization and start to conform with the elements that were used before to exclude others. I would recommend that you really take a look at Pablo Freire's work and see what he has to offer. He has so many thoughts, and I think all inclusion specialists should really read his work.